Thanks a lot, Eric. All right. Well, it's rare you get treated to 2 plant pathologists back to back. Or maybe you won't think that's such a treat. So Donna covered very nicely a very important disease that occurs on the roots of melons, and I'll be talking about a disease that pretty much affects anybody who grows melons here in the desert Southwest, and that's powdery mildew. Okay, you've probably all seen powdery mildew. You know, here it looks relatively benign. It's covering the major part of this leaf, and if you could magnify this, you would see all these little spores here. But the leaf generally looks very green and doing quite nicely. Problem is, once you get an infection level this high, and you add to the mix growing melons here in the desert, when this disease begins to develop, mid-May going on through June, where we have high temperature levels, low humidity, exposing the melons to sunlight, so you're losing not only the leaf canopy, but you get sunburn on the melons, and both of those contribute to yield loss. So, to get powdery mildew, as any other disease, you have to have 3 main ingredients. You need the melon crop, which is on the left. You need the fungus, which is usually around. And you need a favorable environment. So we're going to just go over quickly what that favorable environment is. Basically, this is what helps downy mildew to progress into a very devastating disease. The fungus grows generally from 50 to 90 degrees, which happens to be where melons like to grow as well. Depending on how favorable the temperature is for disease development. In other words, if you're at 50 or 90, it'll take about 7 days for between when infection actually first occurs and when you finally see the symptoms. When things are very favorable, usually about 70 degrees, that window shrinks down to 3 days. So when things are very favorable temperature-wise, every 3 days you're getting a new production of spores, a new set of infections, and basically what happens here, it goes from a disease that you don't see at all to one that's rampant. And actually, when we get our temperatures going above 100 degrees, it'll actually stop the disease development. It doesn't kill the fungus, but it just kind of waits until it cools back down at night, and then the disease will continue to develop. High relative humidity will favor infection, but we're talking about humidity levels below saturation. In other words, free moisture will actually impede the disease developing. But higher levels of humidity, which are found in a nice thick canopy, do foster disease development. So the 2 main options that you would have as a grower to manage this disease would be to use resistant varieties if they're available, and then to use fungicides. Now, I think Eric mentioned earlier when he was talking about insects, when we talk about resistance, we're not talking about immunity. So if you use a resistant cultivar, you probably will still have to use fungicides as well. And an integrated approach to managing this disease, using both of these tools, is advisable if they are available. Certainly the fungicides are available, but the resistant cultivar may not be available today. But we need to be aware that whichever ones of these tools that you use can affect the pathogen population. And what I mean by that is with respect to the development, if you use a resistant cultivar, there are variants within that population that can overcome that resistance. And if you use repeated use of one particular cultivar that has resistance, over time, that population will develop insensitivity to that resistance, and that genetic resistance will no longer be usable. The same thing happens if you use a particular fungicide over and over and over again. It will enrich that pathogen population until finally the fungicide is not effective anymore. That's why we always advise strongly that you use fungicides with different modes of action. Okay. If you look at the list of fungicides that are available for powdery mildew, we actually have quite a few. At first glance, you say, wow, this is great. But I do want to point out a couple of things here that might temper your enthusiasm a little bit. First of all, I've coded these. Obviously, these are not in alphabetical order. I've just listed them with respect to the particular mode of action that they have. These numbers here on the right-hand side are simply like code numbers for you. If a fungicide has the same number, it means it has the same mode of action. For example, right here, these three products, totally different names, different active ingredient names, but they have the same mode of action. So again, when you're thinking about resistance management, you have to focus on those numbers and not the names. So anyway, we do have several different products here that are available that have different modes of action. Most of these, if they're just a number that's a single site mode of action, these products generally are the ones that are more susceptible to insensitivity developing within the pathogen population because they only act on the pathogen at one particular site. The other products here, we have two, sulfur and chlorothalonil. They're followed by M, M2, and M5. That designates that there are multi-site mode of action, which is good. The problem is you'll see later that, especially in the case of Bravo, they're not that effective. But they are good for resistance management, in that they attack the organism at multiple sites, and the ability of the fungus to develop resistance to these is very, very low. And then we have some biofungicides that are out there. There's more than that. I've just picked three that I've worked with for quite some time. And actually, these are not classified within this mode of action system. Basically, biological materials do act at a multi-site level.